Okay, being conscious of time, it's probably a good opportunity for us to get started. So, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Simon Rhodes. I'm the marketing manager at Pressac, and thank you so much for joining us for the webinar today. Obviously, the title is IoT and the Simplification of Data. Today's webinar is held in conjunction with our friends at Enerlytic. So, I'd like to welcome Hannah Drake, who's the founder and CEO. And Mark Lawrance, who's the Director of Strategic Accounts for Pressac. So, hi guys, thanks for joining us today.
Hello, you okay?
Well, Mark, yours is quite noisy, Mark. A lot of background noise.
Is it? I'm not sure what I can do about that. I'm okay with that.
Seems a bit better now.
I'll sit closer. There you go.
There we go. So, IoT and the simplification of data. Obviously, it's quite a broad topic. So hopefully that there'll be plenty of opportunities for us to run through quite a range of different subjects as we go through. There will be an opportunity for you all to ask any questions throughout the webinar, or we can leave till the very end and then we'll spend sort of 10-15 minutes going through that. So let's kick off with really there's a lot of feedback coming from I have to let him in and out. So with that in mind, Hannah, do you want to kick us off? Just why is data simplification important in IoT applications and platforms?
Yeah, I think for me, really understanding what you're trying to achieve is probably the crux of it. I think there can be a lot of the time a bit of a data overload. It can be quite overwhelming looking at so many different data sets. And I think going back to basics and really trying to understand what the goal is the most important bit, and then making that easy and simple to understand for yourself, for your team, for the business, to kind of look at and achieve overall objectives for that business as well. I think a lot of the time we can be bombarded with so many different data sets that it just becomes a little bit counterintuitive in that sense. So it's really looking at what data we can provide, what data you need to access in order to achieve that goal, and making it simple and easy to understand.
So would you say that one of the biggest issues is then handling the huge amount of data that obviously you can obtain? What sort of other sort of issues do you think, or other problems that would hold the challenges with regards to IoT data?
I mean, IoT data is fantastic, and I think there's so much that you can get out of IoT devices. So I think starting from scratch and really understanding what the goal is, and then working your way back from there. So I think a lot of the time we work with customers and it might be a sustainability manager who has a target of carbon emissions reductions, or it might be an energy manager who wants to understand how to reduce downtime in the organisation. So I think the use of IoT devices are fantastic because it gives you that data, and I think when we look at data and data granularity, a lot of what can be achieved through IoT devices, what the goal is can dictate the type of granularity that you need, whether that's high granularity and looking at sub-second data and looking at downtime of machinery, or whether that's looking at more kind of lower granularity and summarizing that data for the wider team in order to just look at kind of compliance reporting, carbon emissions reporting, whatever it might be, but taking it back. And I guess the crux of it is looking at the IoT device, the IoT data, and really trying to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve, I think is very important.
Mark, you've worked in the industry for some time now. What would you say is the most important thing about obtaining real-time insights into data?
I think it's based on a number of factors, and hopefully you can hear me better now. I've got a headset on, so without the background noise. The underpinning, I guess, strategy for data, and we've seen this on quite a few webinars, and we mentioned it a little while ago, is data has to have a purpose. You can get swamped by data and people can cite having loads of data just for the sake of it, but the data has to have a purpose and it has to have a point. It has to be relevant and appropriate to what you want to do. So the value in obviously driving out the data has to be associated with a specific purpose. Otherwise, you're just getting a wealth of data for the sake of it. Now, whilst that has benefits in certain areas, like sort of the development of AI models and large language learning and those kind of fundamental parts where we've obviously worked with analytics and things, is focusing very specifically on specific targeted data sets that we know that if we understand and can generate suitable quality of data and resolution of data, will actually deliver the outcomes we want to. So I think that's the key thing from our perspective. There is a tendency to try and do too much too quickly and try and capture too much data, but there's no point in having it if you can't actually do something with it. Citing examples where you can stick or you can install a wealth of data and ultimately get as far as visualizing it devalues the whole sort of intelligent workplace or smart building solution, because it doesn't allow you then to drive value out or to make logical sense of it. I think if you can identify the solution that's needed to solve a problem, so a very specific problem, work out what needs to happen, what the steps are, and then build things in layers and introduce data as understanding develops, that seems to be a far more appropriate, cost-effective way of delivering ROI and ultimately achieving the goals that you want to.
Yeah, I agree. We a lot of the time we do more of like a zoomed in approach. So we start at a very high level, what are you consuming at a main building, main meter level, then start looking at, okay, let's start looking at distribution boards, and you start to identify areas that you might want to delve deeper into, and then we can start to build on that. So a lot of the time, kind of as Mark said, it's a bit of a phased approach. You don't want to start, let's just monitor absolutely everything, because it can be a little bit meaningless. I think if you can start at the kind of very basic level and then build it up from there, because you start to see things that you might not necessarily have realized, and then you want to take a turn and start looking at the detail of that, and I think a lot of the time the savings can be better achieved by doing it in more of a phased approach, like you say there, Mark.
So obviously, there's been quite a lot of coverage in the news today about Ofgem increasing the prices of wholesale gas and electricity over the next year or so. I think it's April, and the beginning of April it starts. Excuse me. How can people take this data, this sort of complex, very granular data, and simplify it and take it into some sort of sustainability strategy? How can they use the data and create a strategy off the back of that?
I think you have to ultimately use data in the first instance as a bit of a baseline, really understand where you are at the moment, because unless you have a baseline, it's very hard to set targets and determine where you want to be in the next year. So I think start from just understanding where you are at the moment, and then start to try and work out where that comes from, because ultimately, with energy prices increasing, the only thing you can do to reduce that is to reduce your consumption. So you really have to understand, what you're consuming now and where the areas are of reduction, but then you can build on that. So once you know what your baseline is, you might be able to set targets within areas of the building, within different departments. So whether it's an energy manager, whether it's the finance team, whether it's the sustainability team, so start to identify what those targets mean and how you're going to get there. But really you need to kind of start from understanding where you are today, and then building up from there, really.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of approaches, and looking at the list of people that are listening to this, it's pleasing to see there's quite a lot of them actually we work with already. But I think there's a number of things you can use a range of data sources. It doesn't have to be IoT. There's a lot of incumbent data out there that BMS systems have and existing installed solutions and hardware has. But if you can take that data, you could potentially have more of a basic sort of like data trigger model, which means you've got a basic sort of IFTT set of rules. If windows are open, lights turn off, or sorry, not lights, aircon turns off, or if it's the weekend and power is going to a piece of equipment or a piece of plant that shouldn't be on, like a compressor, then that can be turned off. So you can automate a lot of sort of basic activities and actions at a top level. You don't need to get particularly complex with that, and that will deliver some immediate efficiencies, as Hannah said, which will allow or should support the reduction of unnecessary service consumption. It could be that you're actually operating quite a lean environment anyway, and you can use the data to support the environment and the credentials and the sort of experience that you're already giving to people. More property management side of things, where site sort of multi-share offices and sort of multi-tenant spaces are provided, and they are an appropriate energy efficient building in which to operate, and the property owners and landlords can use the data to support that, and obviously cite the experience of going there. The next step typically then is, obviously, once you take that data, instead of just using it in an initial capacity, is taking that into sort of the land of big data, and using that to profile and model out and understand what could go on. And that's when you get, obviously, the medium and longer term benefits around condition monitoring, preventative maintenance, and the ability to understand and start to predict what can go on. Now, data in that instance doesn't necessarily need to be simple, because it's the fuel that drives the whole thing. That's obviously where all our sort of software partners excel massively in building the systems and the platforms that can take that very sort of diverse set of data and start to interpret it and help it make sense to people. There's a lot of platforms out there that can consume data and can draw very nice pictures and can illustrate very nicely what stuff does, but having the ability then to turn that visualization into sort of actionable insights and understand what it actually means to people and develop the strategy and drive activities out the back of that, I think is where we're seeing people have a lot of success. And if you can then obviously have output triggers to start to control building environment, plant equipment, manufacturing environments, those kind of things as well, you get the benefit of that sort of data trigger activity, but with the benefits of all the learning and the I guess the cleverness that the software is able to bring to it. And that, I think, is probably where the value of data supports that initiative most most credibly.
And I think demonstrating it at the back end as well, if you've taken up an energy efficiency project that's very, very specific to a certain area, having that data to kind of pinpoint exactly what you've done and demonstrate those savings, I think is quite important, because, if you're having to report on certain areas, or you've got targets that you need to be very specific with, I think that's where IoT data is very helpful, because you can be very, instead of just having a half-hourly data set where you hope that what you've done has managed to save consumption, but you're just assuming based on a main meter level, you can be very specific with IoT devices, I think, which helps when it comes to demonstrations of that.
So obviously you're both quite active within the market, looking at new people to work with. Are there any common trends that you're starting to see? I know obviously people's sustainability and the net zero promise is at the forefront of companies' minds now. Is there any trends that you're starting to see with the people that are approaching you and asking for advice and help around their sustainability model?
I think for me, a lot of the approaches I get are from companies that haven't necessarily done much yet when it comes to energy reduction, and are looking for something that allows them to kind of dip their toe in, if you will. We've had a lot of success with a Smart Start product, which is more of like a beginner's guide to energy monitoring, really, a couple of CTs, gateways, and the monitoring piece. But it just allows them to get used to how the devices work, how they can start to identify what the trends are there. But I've noticed a lot probably because of the energy price increase, and obviously because of carbon reduction targets. They're just trying to dip their toe into what more can we do. So we know what our bill is at the end of every month, but what more can we do? How can we identify where we're wasting energy? And I think for me, there's more and more interest in trying to work out where that comes from.
You know, sorry, you touched on obviously the price increases there, and do you have much pushback from people when you're trying to explain to them the benefits of monitoring their energy? And again, for yourself, Mark, when you're selling these products into to businesses that can help them save energy, I remember the stories that were flying around when smart meters were introduced to domestic households. And do you get any pushback from businesses around that, or any questions as to what you're actually going to be monitoring?
I think it varies, and people come at the journey, at this sort of CSR journey, from many different angles. Often we see that regardless of whether it's industrial, manufacturing, corporate, you know, there's a range of different market verticals. They all pay a bill. They all have to spend money on a regular basis, and they get told by the energy companies, this is how much you've used, this is how much you've spent. The granularity of understanding, well, actually, where have I used that, what's used it, when's it used it, is often, or usually, the first step in determining whether that spend is appropriate or not. You know, we will get people, and we do get people, get in touch with us and say, I want to reduce my energy consumption, or I want to reduce energy, and have you got sensors that will help me do that? And the answer is no, we don't have sensors that will help you do that. What we do is we have sensors that will allow you to understand your consumption. Then it's up to you to work out whether or not it's appropriate or correct, or to go to a specialist such as Enerlytic to help them understand whether it's appropriate or correct. But the first step is really getting insight into what's going on, and you can get as granular as you like, you can get as clever as you like with determining that, but you can't make a decision on a direction to go in, or save energy, or justify your existing energy spend without actually realizing what it is. Where people have got a good energy consumption profile already, or have done efforts and you know, implemented various strategies which help them do that, then obviously what we're seeing is they're advocating that down their supply chain, which obviously is looking at some of the wider scope emissions, the scope 2 and 3 stuff. So that is again something that people are, you know, approaching us now and saying, I've been told, or I've been instructed or advised that we need to do. So we're seeing that the sort of the penetration of that requirement to be growing. But as always, everyone's very different, and you can't have, I don't think there isn't a one size fits all. Everyone has a unique requirement.
Okay. So we're looking now, one of the most popular topics that seems to be on everybody's lips, regardless of industry or what sort of element it means to the industry. Hannah, where do you see AI fitting into this whole data energy monitoring and the simplification of that data? Is there going to be AI that's going to be able to just take all this massive amount of data and then sort of simplify it and put it into biteable chunks? Or what's your view on AI within the industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a general rule, I think AI is so exciting, and I think it's what you do with AI that's the exciting part, because you know, you can just see with, you know, ChatGPT as an example. Like 5 years ago, we would be, you know, you'd be Googling stuff forever. You can just ask a quick question now and it's there at an instant. I think certainly where you look at energy data and you've got so many different data sets, you know, you've not just got your energy consumption data within the organization, you know, you've got your production data, you've got staff data, you've got all sorts of different data sets that I think can support businesses when it comes to identifying or looking at recommendations in order to, you know, what can you do to reduce that consumption. You know, AI isn't here to replace everybody's job, in my opinion, but I think it can do a lot of what, you know, if people are going around the building looking at certain things, or looking at so many different data sets and manually trying to work out what they can do with that and how they all tie in together, and what they can do to make sense of those data sets as a whole. I think that's where AI can really fit in and start to identify, okay, well, I've noticed that your energy consumption increases when X happens, or it decreases when X happens, and it's looking at all those different data sets that I think AI can really come into its own and start recommending what businesses can do to start reducing consumption, some things that they might not have seen themselves, that's picked up via AI.
Is there any plans for Enerlytic to introduce any sort of AI help towards?
Yes,
platform?
yeah, we've got a lot of plans actually over the next year or so. So definitely keep your eye out. I'm not going to reveal too much just yet.
Mark, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think the phrase AI is bandied around very heavily by people. In a lot of cases, they absolutely know what they're talking about, and in other cases, they really don't seem to. I think it's occasionally people can be guilty of trying to use it as a bit of a catch-all to do any kind of sort of profiling and sort of software modeling. But I think there is there's two sides to it. I think there's your sort of general sort of publicly available data sets that can be used to sort of train models initially to give a guide or an insight into sort of general concepts, and that will generally be enough for people to start understanding really how their estate is operating. If you want to start getting specific, then obviously that's where you introduce additional technologies or make use of client-specific data sets, which will allow then the AI models to train themselves specifically on what's going on within your client space. I mean, a good example could be an injection molding machine, for example, on average can use anywhere between sort of 10 kilowatt, 30 kilowatts of energy. So if you're wanting to profile whether a piece of equipment such as that has got a normal energy consumption profile and you're using sort of generally sort of publicly available data, then the models may well advise that it's operating in accordance with standard parameters. It's only when you put your specific data acquisition strategy in place that allows you then to understand what your individual plant and equipment is using, and again, just because you've got 2 or 3 pieces of equipment that is maybe the same make and model and operating and doing something very similar, each will differ. So trying to apply a blanket rule to the overall sort of management and monitoring of those is a subsequent step, but I think the true benefit of AI will come in where it can start to get very specific and profile, but it can only do that if it's trained on your specific environment, which is where obviously this data specific to that piece of equipment comes in. So again, you can't put a sensor in and save energy. You can't stick AI in and immediately get benefits. These systems require training, they require ongoing manipulation and implementation and management of by people that are really sort of committed to doing what they're doing. I think there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't a out the box solution that's going to do it. It's an evolving process, and it's really exciting to see a lot of people investing a lot of time and effort and money in developing these models. But certainly from my side, from Pressac's perspective, none of it can happen without data. So, you know, the IoT layer that we see or the available data sets underpins all of these strategies. What we just need to do and what people need to focus on is taking data that's relevant, appropriate, and of high quality. I mean, people cite like the 3 Vs or the 5 Vs or the 6, 7 Vs type thing. So, you know, and I think that's fundamentally relevant to what you need to do and where you need to focus. Don't get carried away with being able to capture 1,000,001 pieces of telemetry. Just focus on what you need to do, what you need to get, and how it needs to work for you first, and then develop that model and develop your learning as you go in a logical way. I think that's probably, you know, the best piece of advice I could give to anybody.
Yeah, and I also think the wider piece, which is probably a whole different conversation in itself, but you know, looking at the amount of energy AI consumes generally is an interesting one. And we saw, you know, a couple of weeks back with the Chinese AI platform, I can't quite remember the name.
DeepSeek.
yes, that significantly uses significantly less energy than others out there in the market. So I think that's probably like I say, it's a wider piece and a separate conversation, but it's just something that we need to be aware of, that if you're utilizing AI to reduce energy, you don't want to be using more energy than it is saving you in that sense as well.
Definitely, definitely. So, have you been surprised by any sort of specific industries that have started to come forward a little bit more when it's coming to energy saving and energy monitoring? Is it kind of one of those things that's now become sort of the norm across all different sectors, or has there been any specific ones that have kind of really stood out to you that have either you've worked with, or any industries that you've kind of thought, oh, this is quite a new one for us?
Yeah, for me personally, I think the manufacturing's a huge sector for us. I think because of because of the amount of energy that manufacturers consume, but also because of the amount of machinery on there. Even just looking at consumption during downtime periods, what can be done with that. So I think there's a lot that can be done in manufacturing with energy reduction. But I think purely because it's such a big consumer, it's probably top of the list of areas that need to be prioritised in terms of reduction as well. It will be one of the biggest costs for most manufacturers now. So that's been a huge area for us. And retailers as well, multi-site retailers that also want to have better visibility across the portfolio. I've noticed that a lot of certainly multi-site portfolios have, might have energy managers within each store that are looking at their relevant bits. But I think if you look at them as a whole, at a group level, there's a lot of interest in what can be done to support the reduction of consumption in that sector as well. It's a sector that's struggled, famously over the last 5 or 6 years. So I think again, anything that can be done to reduce costs is a big win for those sorts of organisations.
Mark, anybody that you've kind of seen a bit more of a spike in the inquiries coming through? Any specific sectors?
Yeah, I think again, it varies. I know obviously a lot of this conversation so far is focused on energy, but there are, in industry and manufacturing, automotive in particular, big users of energy. They are, or their first step is looking at what their consumption is and understanding that to quite a significant degree. From more of the corporate side and the office space, again, whilst there is interest in that, the primary areas at the moment are around environmental conditions and occupancy. A lot of property managers, landlords, obviously find themselves with quite a large amount of real estate that is relatively underutilized compared to sort of 5 or 6 years ago. And obviously with various return to office policies, work from home policies, that sort of hybrid nature of working, there is a vested interest at the moment in ensuring that the spaces that are made available to people are optimized and as appropriate as possible. So the focus is very much on the workplace experience and supporting people's time in those spaces and making sure they're able to get value out of them whilst they're there, because real estate is actually becoming a very expensive commodity to have. So we are seeing people prioritizing different areas of telemetry to understand what's going on across that space. So there isn't a one size fits all. There isn't a particular approach that works best. People need to understand what's going on in order to make decisions. It's that OODA loop approach where you've got to observe and orient first. So once you look at what's happening and you can decide what's happening, and then you work out, should it be happening, and if it shouldn't, what should be doing instead, and then obviously apply and implement accordingly. But I think generally people are able to improve their work environment either through energy usage or reduction of energy usage or improvement in workplace experience, or the environmental conditions, which obviously support various initiatives once they understand what's happening. So people are coming into this environment from many different points on that triangle, with a view to sort of understanding that first as part of a longer term strategy.
Brilliant. Hannah, talk us through the sort of start to finish an example maybe of somebody that's used the Enerlytic platform and what that looks like from start to finish? Is it complicated? Is it really easy to use? Is it easy to implement? How does that look?
Yeah, so very, very simple. And I can kind of, we've got a customer that is more than happy for us to mention them. And it's a good example of how it works and the process that they followed. So Hewland Engineering there in the automotive industry. And they came to us and Pressac with they have a target of reducing energy consumption by 12%. So in order to do that, they obviously need to kind of understand where it is they're coming from and what they can do to reduce consumption. So we monitor their main meter data, and we can understand what's going on at a building level. But they bought a number of Pressac sensors, and they installed them. They did the installation themselves, so it was very straightforward as long as there's the electrician on site. They did the installation themselves, which connects to the gateway, sends data to Enerlytic. But what they decided to do is do it as we mentioned earlier on, do it as a phased approach. They've got each part of their kind of plant that they want to monitor. They started off on one area to really understand what their machinery was consuming. So they put a number of sensors on the different parts of the machinery, and they start to get that data through. Now they wanted more frequent data, so they look at the data every 30 seconds, and they've also integrated it with a couple of internal systems that they've got that calculates the downtime. But what they've managed to do through that is take that data and again, make it easy to understand for each member of the team within that department, and understand what the cost of that downtime is. So they've got the consumption, they've got the different timings of the machinery, but they've just based on that data alone, they've managed to reduce one of the pieces of equipment by 80% in terms of downtime. So it's a very big number. But it's, like I say, starting from scratch, just starting at a smaller level, so kind of working their way around the site is what their kind of intention is. And this is purely just the first area that we're looking at. But using that data in order to look at what they can do around that 12% reduction target. So the process itself was really straightforward, and I've got a case study that we can share around the group as well that I'm more than happy to send. But it was very easy for them to understand exactly what they needed to do in order to reduce the consumption. But it also gave them, in terms of the visibility, it gave the team that visibility and that understanding of, if they were to do X, the cost saving is Y, and having all that information. And Enerlytic, we also include their costs, so we upload the supply contracts, so it's very easy for them to understand that if we reduce our consumption by 10%, this is what it means in cost terms. So it can also help the wider business as well, from the the sustainability team that's got the carbon emission reduction targets, as well as their finance team that needs to understand, what does it mean in pounds and pence. So through the use of the platform, they can see all of that information, and so far it's working really well, and like I say, some very significant savings for them.
And do you find that with a lot of the people that approach you, is it very much a case of, this is what we need to do, we need to save some money, and this is one of the ways we've identified it? Or is it more around that sort of sustainability, corporate social responsibility? Do people come to you with a mix of both, or is it predominantly pounds and pence, as you say, we need to save some money, how can we do it?
I'd say it's a mixture of both. But even, a lot of the conversation, I'll have discussions with sustainability managers, and I'll have conversations with finance directors, both of which have a different goal. One's reducing emissions, one's reducing cost. But if you go to the crux of it, what they need to look at is how they can reduce consumption, because, effectively, if they reduce their consumption, it will reduce their carbon emissions and it will reduce their costs. So, regardless of what the end goal is, it tends to be a similar process that we follow. But yeah, we might have organisations that have got just what, someone that's interested in looking at their energy data, once they start sharing that internally, other people within different departments were also interested for other reasons. We're looking at the same data set, but they might look at it in a different way. They're looking at the consumption and what that means for their cost, or they're looking at the consumption and what it means for their carbon emissions. So it can be quite different in terms of how they interpret the data, but the data is the same.
Find that as well, Mark?
Yeah, again, I think each sector is different and have got different sort of areas of focus, but sometimes you can just get really straightforward and really simple. We've got a client, Toyota, who were able to reduce very significantly their energy consumption per manufactured vehicle. And they developed a whole series of additional benefits around condition monitoring and preventative maintenance out the back of it once they could see what they've gone on. We've had devices used in NHS data centres where people have trialled not overcooling the space quite as much, and obviously the associated energy reduction in managing and maintaining a space. People obviously use environmental monitors in education to obviously support grant applications and funding, but as obviously part of the initiative to provide healthy classrooms and healthy spaces for people. So there's a whole different range of things that people can achieve with it if they've got the desire and the appetite to do so. So again, it's one of those things where, working closely with Hannah and her team, you can, with the benefit of engaging with, say, experts such as Hannah, you can deploy technology and software and platforms in a relevant, appropriate way with little impact into your daily operations, but the benefits can actually be quite significant and substantial in a very short space of time.
Excellent. Hannah, security and cybersecurity and data breaches seems to be quite topical at the moment as well. What sort of measures can businesses take to ensure that the data that they're getting remains secure? Is that something that's built into the Enerlytic platform?
Yeah, so we've got a lot of security measures within the Enerlytic platform, and also we tend to find that some customers, when we talk about installing clamps that need to connect to some form of internet, obviously don't want to look at their kind of internal Wi-Fi. So there's other, things that they can do, like SIM cards, for example, that take it away from any internal Wi-Fi connections or whatever it might be. So there's the security from the hardware side of things, but also certainly the security from the Enerlytic platform. And there's lots that we've done internally to kind of support that and make sure that it's as secure as possible.
Thank you. Mark, anything to add to that?
I guess it's just security built in by design, really. From our side of things, we recognize that the devices often, but not always, get installed onto a client network, and obviously having a good sympathy and a good understanding with the IS teams, they want to make sure that anything they're introducing onto the network is appropriate and not going to introduce any area of risk or potential harm. Again, different requirements require different solutions. With ours, you can set entirely on network, you can set entirely off network, but there's a range of mechanisms. But fundamentally, any system that introduced shouldn't introduce any additional IS risk. We use the Ocean protocol, which we feel has particular benefits around the security, both physical and from a technology perspective. But again, there's a number of different things, and there is never going to be, again, one size fits all. But from our side, we take that as a fundamental requirement that's baked in right from the very beginning in the generation, the production of data, regardless of where it comes from or what it is, has to be done in a secure, appropriate way. Otherwise, obviously, you introduce errors and areas of vulnerability right at the beginning, which nobody wants.
Wonderful, thank you. So I'm remaining conscious of time. Does anybody have any questions for Mark or Hannah or for myself? We've got sort of 5 minutes booked in for a bit of Q&A. But if you do have anything, please feel free to type into the Q&A section. seems to be that we have quite a shy bunch online today. Finally, Mark, Hannah, any final thoughts to add before we leave for the day?
I think for me, obviously, I mentioned a case study there. More than happy to kind of share that around, just to give a couple of examples of how, what the process is, and the, I guess, the benefits of the software and of using the IoT device as well, kind of all available. I guess I'm around for a chat if anyone wants to know more or have a bit of a demo or anything like that. So kind of welcome any questions, any discussions that anyone wants to have.
I will be sharing a video and a transcript of this, and I'll include the case study from Hannah and her contact details should anybody want to get in touch. Mark, any final thoughts from yourself?
I guess really it's data underpins any strategy in this regard, but before getting onto any or commission anything, it's look at what data do you need, why do you need it, and what benefit do you think you'll get out of it, and then what's available already. Often there are untapped sources of data across your estate, or that is not being used, it's not being accessed. So what have you already got and what can you do with it, and then where are the gaps, and then what do you need to do to fill those gaps in a way that's going to return value and deliver value, and do it in a really sort of well considered way. I think that's the best recipe for getting sort of immediate ROI and building a solid foundation for future growth and scalability.
So as we have no more questions, then I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. We will be hosting another webinar in the coming month or so, keep your eyes peeled for that. Once again, Hannah, thank you so much for your time and sharing the insight from Enerlytic. And Mark, as usual, it's always a pleasure to hear about Pressac and what's going on there. If anybody does have any questions that they seem to remember, feel free to drop me an email and I'll make sure that they get passed on. But thank you all for your time, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.